Hey everyone, welcome to Hope for Our Times. Here we are. It is Monday. It is live, and I have a special guest today. We're going to be talking about several things, including the rapture, whether or not it's a false doctrine. We're going to be talking about Ezekiel 38 and the Mideast invasion, invasion of Islamic invasion of Israel, the Mideast meltdown. And my guest today is from Texas. Please welcome Andy Woods. Dr. Andy Woods, great to have you on here with me. This is fantastic. And so I'm thinking about this, Andy. It seems like every guest I've had for the last month and a half has been from Texas. And it really is kind of it's fascinating to me. I'm thinking maybe I should just move there. Then I wouldn't have to do Zoom all the time.
Well, maybe the Lord is trying to tell you something. I don't know.
Maybe. Time to get out of California. Listen, I'm looking at people online right now, and there's people from Florida, Oklahoma, South Texas, which I guess that's what would be considered somewhere near you. And looks like you have a lot of fans that are on here already, too. So they want me to tell you hello. So this
fantastic.
is good. This is off to a good start. I also got challenged yesterday on my message I had for Sunday morning. I finished up the book of Revelation, and after I finished up the book of Revelation, in it, chapter 22, I'm talking about the leaves of the tree for the healing of the nations, and I mentioned a couple of things, and then they told me I need to talk to Andy Woods. He'll correct me on that. So we're eventually gonna get there too, but it's great having you on here.
Yeah.
Anything in particular you want to say before we get going?
No, Tom, it's just great to be here, and thanks for having me.
That's going to be great. By the way, just everybody, Andy is going to be at a conference. We're going to have our Hope for Our Time conference in Huntington Beach, California. It will be in August, if California is not shut down by our governor by then. Also joining me is going to be Monkey, Billy Crone, and Brandon Holdhouse. And we'll have a couple of others on there also. It's going to be a great conference in August. We'll have those dates up for you real soon. Andy, I'm looking forward to having you with me. Okay, let's get going. I want to ask you this first. Before we get into the Mideast meltdown, I get a lot of people whenever I talk on the rapture that tell me I'm a heretic. There's no such thing as a rapture. So am I a heretic? Does the Bible teach a rapture?
Well, the people telling you that must be the same people that tell me that also. They tell me the same thing. But the truth of the matter is the rapture is a doctrine. Probably its clearest expression is in 1 Thessalonians 4, and I want to focus on verse 17, where it says there, we will be caught up, and it's the Greek verb harpazo. And interestingly enough, we get the English word harpoon, from that Greek word. Harpoon is you spear a sea animal and you yank it to yourself, and harpazo basically means to be seized or caught up by force. And just because the fact that it says up makes it very different than down. All the other references to the return of Christ, Old Testament, New Testament, prior to this rapture teaching, describe Jesus as descending. So he's coming back, Revelation 19, from heaven to the earth. His feet are going to touch the Mount of Olives, and it's going to split in half, etc. Well, this is something very different. This is us being caught up. So, people that say it's heretical, to me, they're having a difficult time directionally with up and down. Down is not up and up is not down. Paul is obviously describing a coming of Christ in very different terms there. And so it's not heretical. It's a biblical truth.
So when I hear the teaching on the blessed hope, where Paul's writing to Timothy, is that blessed hope? I often hear it connected with the rapture. People write me, I'm looking for the blessed hope. Do you connect that with the rapture?
Yeah, you're talking about Titus too, I believe.
Titus, what did I say, Timothy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's clearly the rapture, because it says we're looking for the blessed hope. And that's the event that we're looking for in the church age, the any moment return of Christ to snatch us out of this world. We're not looking for the second advent, because the second advent can't happen until the whole 7-year tribulation period elapses. But we are looking for the event that will precede the 7-year tribulation period, which is the blessed hope. And so I think Titus 2, is a rapture passage also.
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of confusion with people also in talking about the rapture. People do confuse the second coming of Christ, which I put at the end of the tribulation period when Jesus comes back, with the rapture. So I'll be talking about the rapture, us going up, as you say, directional, Jesus coming back. They're not the same thing. And when we look at Bible prophecies, the prophecies are really about the second coming of Christ, things happening during the tribulation, and then even things that will be fulfilled in the millennial kingdom. So we are projecting all the way to the end. That's why someone you and I would say, hey, look, the rapture could happen at any moment.
Yeah. Well, I think the Holy Spirit, throughout the church age has set up the doctrine so that every generation, believes and thinks that it could happen in the next split second. It's just our generation, more than any other, is seeing the stage set for the tribulation. And if the stage is being set this aggressively for the tribulation, and the rapture of the church precedes the tribulation, then the rapture is coming even faster. So I think that's, the old analogy. I've heard Chuck Smith use this, and John Walvoord, the signs of Christmas, tell you that Thanksgiving, is near. And so when we see the world moving aggressively in the direction of the 7-year tribulation period, and the rapture comes before the tribulation, the rapture is coming even faster, just like Thanksgiving occurs earlier on the calendar than Christmas. So the signs of Christmas actually tell you that Christmas is coming, but Thanksgiving is coming even faster, if that analogy helps.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Okay, now, years ago, I read a book by a man named Marvin Rosenthal, and he taught the PreWrath Rapture. It still gets a lot of airplay out there. There's a lot of people that believe it. You believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, I really don't like their name, PreWrath Rapture, because it doesn't tell you what they believe. Because as far as I'm concerned, I'm a pre-wrath rapturist. I just think the wrath starts at the beginning of the tribulation. So everybody's a pre-wrath rapturist. Mid-tribs, they claim to be pre-wrath rapturists as well. So all of our views, post, where they stand, the rapture comes at the end. Mid, where they stand, the rapture comes in the middle. Pre, where we stand, the rapture comes before. But the name pre-wrath, it's very deceptive. It doesn't tell you what they believe. So a lot of us prefer to call them, 3/4 rapturists. And they kind of get bent out of shape when we call them that, because, they're saying it could happen at some point in the second half. So maybe it won't be exactly 3/4. So I call them almost, or essentially 3/4 rapturists. And they basically believe that the wrath of God is not going to be poured out until the second part of the second half of the tribulation. And so the church is basically going to be here for roughly 3/4 of the tribulation. We're going to be here for all the first half and some of the second half. And that's their basic position. And it comes from this idea that the wrath of God doesn't come until later. And it's a very silly argument when you understand that Jesus is in heaven in Revelation 5, opening a 7-sealed scroll. And as he peels back each seal, a judgment hits the planet. And those judgments are very, very severe. It doesn't matter if they have the name wrath or not. A quarter of the world's population is wiped out when Jesus is doing this there in Revelation chapter 6. And the pre-wrath rapturists basically are trying to tell everybody that that's not the wrath of God. That's the wrath of man or the wrath of Satan. But it's ridiculous, because it is the wrath of God. It's Jesus causing these things by opening this 7-sealed scroll. So their basic view is, roughly the first 3/4 of the tribulation period is not God's wrath, even though Jesus just wiped out 25% of the world's population. Today in COVID, we're all bent out of shape over what, 0.0001% of the world's population. Think of 25% of the world's population being wiped out, and Jesus just caused that. How could that not be the wrath of the Lamb? And they're saying, no, that's the wrath of man or the wrath of Satan, and the wrath of God doesn't start till the final 25%. So the promise that we are exempted from divine wrath just means we're out of here, 75% in. So there's so many problems with their view, but that's the long and short of it, as I understand it.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of division that takes place within the Christian world over your view, whatever your view is of the timing of the rapture. And I think, sometimes I think, there's things that are essential to Christianity. And sometimes we can get too hung up on that. But I believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. I believe that we will be caught up to meet the Lord in the air before Antichrist is revealed. He may be on this planet right now, for all I know. But as far as being revealed to the world, I think we're going to be gone before that takes place. And which also leads me to something else I wasn't going to bother you with. But man, do you get a lot of predictions on who the Antichrist is?
I do, yeah. I don't have much of an answer for him, but you can go ahead and ask me if you want.
No, I'm not going to ask you. We might get some questions to ask us. We'll see in a few minutes. No, I wasn't planning on asking you. I was just curious if you get a lot of those. I get a lot of them. But with the timing of the rapture, the tribulation does not begin until the confirmation of the covenant with Antichrist, Daniel chapter 9. It's the 70th week of Daniel. So there's that confusion. Some people think the tribulation is the rapture happens and then the tribulation begins. Do you believe there's a gap between the rapture and the confirmation of the covenant, which kicks off the tribulation period?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I recently wrote a book on Babylon. It's called Babylon, the Bookends of Prophetic History. And I believe Babylon means Babylon. It's literal Babylon. I know that wasn't on our list of things to go into, but
that's great.
But the only reason I bring that up is people say, well, if we've got to wait around for Babylon to be rebuilt to a worldwide city that's described in Revelation 17 and 18, then I guess the rapture is not imminent. And the answer to that is, well, not necessarily, because we don't know the length of time in between the rapture and the signing of the covenant with the Antichrist that you mentioned a second ago, Daniel 9:27. I mean, there's no scripture that tells you the length of time between those two events. Most of us have our prophecy charts drawn in such a way that they're going to be, sort of back to back, or some people think they're contemporaneous. But when you go back to older scholars like Bullinger and Clarence Larkin that wrote over 100 years ago, they thought there could be a gap of 25 to 50 years. So I think a lot of times we make assumptions that really aren't found in the Bible. So it's completely possible that you could have a rapture, and then you could have a length of time before the 70th week of Daniel, and Babylon, could be rebuilt in between. So the rebuilding of Babylon is no threat, to the imminency of the rapture, if you understand the point you just made, that there could potentially, and it's not something to be dogmatic on because we don't know, but there potentially could be a gap between the rapture and the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period.
Yeah, I agree. And I look at it, I also get that same argument regarding Babylon. I believe Babylon is Babylon, and it will be rebuilt. I believe God is going to deal with it. He says he's going to deal with it. Babylon's been a problem since the beginning. God's going to deal with it. But also I get the same argument regarding the temple, and people will say, well, the temple's going to have to be built in the city of David because we have a major balagan on the Temple Mount between the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Gold Dome. There's no way if the rapture happened now they could ever build a temple there. Well, we don't know. And I look at it with Babylon alone. I imagine the trillions of dollars that are being printed up and what world governments are willing to do right now, especially the Western world, to spend all the money in the world that they possibly can and create more money for their great reset. Listen, the rapture happens. These people want to have a utopian kingdom. They want to have a capital city, and I am convinced God is going to put it into their mind to take all the trillions of dollars and pour it into Babylon because God wants to deal with it. And in that gap period, it's going to be real easy when you have the Western world leaders saying, let's build us a city, as was done with Nimrod so many centuries ago. So I look at this, for me, it's a no-brainer. A gap makes sense. I'm not dogmatic about it, but
Right.
it makes a lot of sense. And my salvation isn't dependent upon whether or not I believe there's a gap.
Sure.
Okay, here's another thing. Then I'm going to get into the coming Islamic Mideast invasion of Israel. Okay, John Darby. I get people all the time say, why do you believe this John Darby stuff? Who was John Darby, and when was the rapture actually taught? Pre-tribulation rapture.
Yeah, I this is kind of an argument that people make with America's founding fathers. They say, look at what a terrible man, Thomas Jefferson was. And look at that he owned slaves. And they think that if they trash Jefferson, they could tear down, the limited government idea of America. And they do the same thing with Darby. They try to hitch the whole rapture idea to Darby, and then they try to find every bad thing, that Darby did in his life. And I guess there's skeletons in everybody's closet. If you looked at our lives carefully enough, you could probably find some skeletons. And they think if they trash Darby, they can trash the pre-trib rapture doctrine. But the truth of the matter is, Darby, all he did is he retrieved the doctrine from the Bible. And if you study the life of Darby, he had a horse riding accident. This is in the 1800s, and his leg was broken, and he was taken out of his parish, which was very fruitful. He had a very fruitful ministry, and he was sidelined by God, and he had to just stay still, without modern day medicine that we have today. And of course, there's no cable television in his day. So he's reading the Bible, and through a lot of different things that were happening, he started to see in the Bible that Israel and the church are different. And one of the things that he saw is with Israel, there's always a calendar and a timing issues, like a 70-year captivity, or you're going into Egyptian bondage for 400 years. And he said, you know what? There's nothing like that for the church or the body of Christ. There's no calendar, and there are none of these timing texts. And he started to see that Israel and the church were different. And if Israel and the church are different, that means Jesus is coming back at a different point for Israel than he is for the church. He's coming back to rescue Israel from the beast at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. And according to John chapter 14, verses 1-3, which is, I think, your first, disclosure of the rapture of the church in the entire Bible, he's coming back for the church before the tribulation period begins to take us to the Father's house. So Darby did not invent this doctrine. He is probably one of the first to crystallize it and systematize it, but it's on the books. Other people believed it before him. The great expert in our day on this is Thomas Ice, and he's found, I think, 37 pre-Darby rapture statements. But Darby gets the credit because he is probably the one that most crystallized it and popularized it. But the truth of the matter is, where did Darby get it from? He got it from the Bible. And so, fine, trash Darby all you want, but the guy at the end of the day you need to trash is Paul. Because the doctrine comes from Paul, and the doctrine comes from Jesus in the upper room. And so that's the logic, so-called, of why everybody's trying to throw John Darby, into the mix.
Yeah. Plus, it's convenient with John Darby. You can say, well, this doctrine didn't even come up till the 1800s. But yeah, I mean, how many times I've took people back to, hey, let's look at First Thessalonians. Paul wrote this. What does this mean? The Greek word harpazo. It's pretty hard to say that the Bible doesn't teach a rapture. And then Paul goes on in chapter 5 of First Thessalonians, and he basically says, do I need to teach you these things? You should already know this. He says, God has not appointed us to wrath. When they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, like birth pains. That implies there's a different group of people, and it's not us.
Well, when Martin Luther in the 16th century, took his stand against the Roman Catholic Church in the Diet of Worms and his debate with Dr. Eck, you know what they said of Luther? Luther, salvation by faith alone. Gosh, I don't find that in the writings of the popes or the priests. And Luther said, unless I'm convinced by scripture alone and sound reason, I'm going to continue to hold to salvation, by faith alone, because I see it in the book of Galatians. And Luther actually called the book of Galatians Meine Frau, which in Germany means my wife. And so Luther led us into the Protestant Reformation because he stood on the Bible and went against the silence of his doctrines found in church history. John Nelson Darby is doing the exact same thing. And Tom, you and I today are doing the exact same thing. It doesn't matter what church father saw the rapture or didn't see the rapture. The truth of the matter is it's in the Bible. Now, having said that, we have found very, very early church fathers that taught pre-tribulationalism. One of them is named Pseudo-Ephraim, and I think his writings go all the way back to the 5th century. And so we're going to find so many fragments that eventually our opponents are going to have to just not use that argument anymore, because there are scattered teachings of pre-tribulationalism throughout church history. And even if there weren't, so what? It's biblical. And like Luther, we're going to stand on the Bible.
Amen. Stand on the Bible. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions. I can't believe we've already gone this long, but this is great. The time's been going by fast. Okay, Ezekiel 38:39. You have a different position on Ezekiel 38:39, the battle of Gog and Magog, than a lot of other scholars, including myself, some of the things I've taught. So Ezekiel 38 is the battle when you have Russia invading Israel. Ezekiel 39 is the victory that God gives to Israel, and there's nobody there to help Israel. So put it into a timeline for us, because I'm pretty confident a lot of our viewers, unless they listen to you, which many do, but the ones who haven't, they've never heard this before.
Yeah, and just to be fair, it's not, I learned this from a professor of mine at Dallas Seminary, the late Harold Honer, and he called it the two-phase view. And once I heard it, I said, that's it. I adopted it as well, because the mistake everybody makes is they take both chapters and they think they happen simultaneously, and they don't see a process. Whereas if you go to Ezekiel 36, you'll see a process there. First Israel, and 37 is brought back in unbelief, then they're regenerated. That's a process that's happening right now. That's not happening in one foul swoop. And so that goes right into the process mindset, goes right into Ezekiel 38 and 39. 38 happens, I think, when the second seal is opened, because you have a transition from peace to war. This is, Ezekiel's very clear in verse 8 and verse 11 that it happens while Israel is living in unwalled villages and at peace. And then the war happens, and that fits with seal 1 and seal 2, peace, the rider on the white horse, and then the second seal, global warfare. And then chapter 39 is the results of that invasion, which I think flash forward to the end of the 7-year tribulation period, because it talks there about the birds of prey coming to feast on all of the carnage. And when you cross-reference that with other passages like Matthew 24 and Revelation 19, that's something associated with the second advent at the end of the 7 years. And it also talks there about a converted Israel. That's how chapter 39 ends. The Spirit comes upon the nation of Israel, and they will know me as the Lord forevermore. And that's an event that happens at the end of the tribulation. That's the event that's necessary for Israel to call Jesus back to the earth, Matthew 23, verse 39, to rescue them from the beast. So that's kind of the long and short of the view. Chapter 38 is the second seal. Chapter 39 is events really commensurate right around the second advent of Christ. And it fits with 36 and 37, which are also depicting a process.
So with Ezekiel 38, then, you have this invasion where this army descends like a cloud upon Israel. What happens to Israel at that point? Because then you're in the beginning of the 7-year tribulation period. So what's going on with Israel as they descend upon them?
Well, this is the tool that God is using to wake them up. And I don't think their waking up is something that happens in a split second, but they're starting to realize that, oh my goodness, we've got no one to help us other than God. And then you throw into the mix another passage from the outside of Ezekiel, the desecration of the temple. And suddenly the man that has secured their peace for 3.5 years is betraying them. And so God is systematically using these events, to awaken them to the need that the reality, I should say, that their Messiah actually came 2,000 years ago. And so the fellow that led me to Christ, he gave me a great piece of theology. Back in 1983, he said, God knocks us down so we look up. And that's really what's happening in the tribulation period. Israel is being knocked down. She's recognizing that the Antichrist is not her Messiah, and she's being knocked down, so she'll look up and she'll recognize that only God can help her, which he does, of course, and he rescues her at the end. So rather, I'm seeing a lot of these things more as a process than, this chapter happens right at this particular point in time. If that helps at all.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you more about that in the future too, because I think it's really fascinating, and I have more questions now to ask you, but we're going to run out of time because I want to get to people's questions. But Psalm 83, Bill Salas is a friend of mine. I've had him on here a few times. He places Psalm 83 as a war that's going to happen, and Israel's going to be conquering neighbors that immediately surround them. What's your view on Psalm 83?
Well, it's kind of a boring view. It's not going to sell a lot of books.
Your view,
but I think Psalm 83, the Psalm 83, so-called Psalm 83 war, is really not a war. You can read Psalm 83 all you want, and you won't see a war there. The language of burning weapons and, that you find in Ezekiel 38, it talks about in Ezekiel 38 and 39 in that day. All of that language is not in Psalm 83. So the only thing that's going on in Psalm 83 is it's a imprecatory prayer against Israel's perennial enemies. That's all it is. And if you turn an imprecatory prayer into a prophecy about a war, then you've got to have a Psalm 2 war, because Psalm 2 is another sort of situation like Psalm 83. So if we're going to have a Psalm 83 war, where are we going to have where are we going to put the Psalm 2 war? Mm-hmm. So my view is kind of boring. I mean, it's not going to sell a lot of books, but I don't think the action for prophecy is in Psalm 83. I think that's a distraction. I think it's just an imprecatory prayer where Asaph is praying for the demise of Israel's perennial enemies. The real action for prophecy is not in Psalm 83, but it's in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And I know that's kind of disappointing to a lot of prophecy students because it's more exciting to have a Psalm 83 war, but I'm just not seeing a predicted war in Psalm 83. Yeah. I'm just seeing an imprecatory prayer there.
Yeah. I want to say this before we move on further. And I want to ask everybody to get your questions ready and send them in. Make sure you put the word question in all caps and ask your question so I can see them. With that is there's different views on eschatology, and I want to point out that because somebody has a different view on certain things regarding eschatology doesn't mean that they're a heretic. And again, it comes down to having the essentials right, because if you've been watching me for a while, on Mondays I do get a different viewpoint sometimes with people that come on this program, and I think it's good to be thinking, and it's good to be challenged in our thinking, and it's good to be able to grow in our knowledge and understanding. And also when it comes to the things regarding the second coming of Christ, we will continue to gain knowledge the closer and closer we come to that time. And, I also believe, Andy, that people that are living during the tribulation period, that have their eyes open, are going to grasp things that we cannot yet grasp. I think there's people that will understand what the mark of the beast is. They'll be able to calculate things. I think God put it in the Bible for a reason. I don't know if it's possible for us to figure it out yet, but I think people during that time will be able to, or I don't know why God would say, here's wisdom, here's the number of a man. So there's some things that are going to take place later on. I believe with Daniel, when Daniel was writing, seal up the words until the time of the end. People living during the tribulation period, the 144,000 Jews, the others, the two witnesses, they're going to have an understanding that I don't have yet. You might have it. I don't have it yet. Right. And there will be the continuing revealing of the truth. I continue to grow in my knowledge of Bible prophecy even now. Sometimes on each week I am.
No, I appreciate that you said that, because I do believe in that progressive revelation is complete. In other words, we don't have progressive revelation today because the books of the Bible have already been written. However, having said that, I do believe in the doctrine of progressive illumination, where our understanding of end time events, I'm speaking of now, gets clearer and clearer and clearer the closer we move towards the time period when these events will be fulfilled. And I'm getting this right out of Daniel chapter 12, verse 4 and verses 8 and 9, where Daniel himself, 600 years before Christ, said to the angel, I heard, but I didn't understand. And the angel specifically said to Daniel, go your way. You've done, in other words, you've done your job. You've recorded revelation. It's not your job to understand all the particulars, but the time will come when many will go to and fro. And I interpret that as reading. To cross-reference that sometime with Amos 8, verse 12, and you'll see it's reading. Many will go to and fro, and knowledge will increase. In other words, as the world gets closer to the time period when these events will occur, a bunch of people are going to start reading the Bible and saying, oh my goodness, we're living in the time period that these things are speaking of, and prophecy is designed by God to get progressively clearer as you move closer and closer to the time period when these events will occur. This, by the way, is one of the answers to the John Nelson Darby argument that you raised earlier. Why was not all of this not known in the church until the 1800s? Well, because of Daniel 12, verse 4. And verses 8 and 9, eschatology was the last area to be systematized. All the other areas of theology had been systematized by then. Why is eschatology last? Because that's the way God set it up. As humanity gets closer and closer to the time period when these things will happen, suddenly people start reading the Bible and they start to understand it better. So we can understand it better than the prior generation. And then, as you say, if the Lord tarries, the next generation will understand it, better than us. And so that's why you shouldn't say, well, so-and-so has a different view of Babylon than me, so they're not a Christian. I didn't even come to my understanding of Babylon until the year 2000. and I was saved in 1983. So I guess by that logic, I really wasn't saved in 1983. I was saved in the year 2000. So anyway, we need to kind of calm down a little bit sometimes with the heresy charge.
I think it's funny. Your salvation is dependent upon what you think about Babylon, whether or not Babylon's actually going to be rebuilt. You got a lot of people on here that are saying hi, so I don't see I see a whole lot of comments. Here's a question for you. This is about the 10 kings. I want to come to that in just a second. But before that, I got to address this because yesterday I'm teaching Revelation chapter 22 about the leaves for the healing of the nations. They said, ask Andy Woods because he's right. What does Andy Woods say those leaves are for in Revelation chapter 22? I think it's verse 2.
Well, gosh, Tom, it's been a while since I've taught the book of Revelation. I don't remember exactly what I said.
Well, I'll tell you what I said. I said, here's the view I had in the past was that for eternity, we're going to be reminded of this need that, for one thing, that we've been saved. But apparently, there's something regarding this tree of life where we're going to need to partake in forever. And then I said, I was asking my friend Don Perkins about this one time, and he said, well, when you look at the millennial kingdom, you have the sheep nations, which are the ones who populate the planet during the millennial kingdom, those people that are saved during the tribulation, but they don't have their glorified body. We don't know when they're going to get their glorified body. The Bible doesn't say it. And he said, and I think Don said this. Don, if you're watching and you didn't say this, send me a note and I'll correct it. But I think it was you that told me this, that you believe those leaves were for those people who are part of the sheep nation because of the glorified body that we have at that time is, we get our glorified body at the rapture, whereas they do not. So he referenced it to those people who are saved during the millennial kingdom. They do not have the same glorified body we do at that point. But I don't know. What's your thought on it?
Well, I don't think this is a millennial kingdom passage.
No, it's not. And he did make that clear. This is a passage about the New Jerusalem, the new heaven, the millennial kingdom is done. But I was trying to make sense of what the leaves are for.
Well, and back in Revelation 21, verse 4, it says there'll be no more death. So I don't really see it as, gosh, we got to keep partaking of these leaves or we're going to die. I think death is a thing of the past. And I just think it's a statement there about how throughout the eternal state, the New Jerusalem and the eternal state, the nations will not be in their state of corruption anymore like they are today. They have a corrupted origin going back to the Tower of Babel. And they've been at war with each other. And that, of course, will increase as we get closer to the second advent of Christ. And there's even a war, interestingly enough, at the end of the millennial kingdom when Satan is let loose from his abyss and he summons the nations and they surround Jerusalem. And I think there is just a statement that kind of thing will never occur again because the old order of things is past. The sin question has been permanently taken care of. The old earth has been dissolved by fire. We're now in a new heaven and new earth. And so war is just kind of a curious game men used to play. But that will never happen again. The nations will be in a permanent state of healing.
All things will be made new.
Yeah.
All things. Okay, ready for some questions?
All right.
Okay. What is Dr. Wood's theory on the fig tree generation?
Well, here again, Tom, it's going to be disappointing to people because, ever since the Hal Lindsey days, and I will say I probably learned more about prophecy from Hal Lindsey than anybody else, but he kind of had this view that, you have to go a generation from 1948, whether it's 40 years and then that date came and went, or 80 years. Then they switched the date to 1967. We've got to go 40 to 80 years, and then the rapture will happen. And then I noticed a lot of guys are going to Psalm 90, where it says a generation is 70 to 80 years. And so they start with 1948 or the Six-Day War, 1967, and they try to run a calculation, what a generation is from that point, and they try to come up with a date for something in eschatology, either the rapture or something. And I think all of that is bankrupt because the terminus a quo is wrong. Terminus a quo is the starting point. They're all looking at 1948 or 1967 as the starting point. But when you look at this generation in context, who is Jesus talking to? He's talking to the generation of Jews that are living in the second half of the tribulation period that just saw their temple desecrated. That's the definitive sign there in verse 15. And the only thing Jesus is saying is that generation of Jews will not pass away until Jesus comes back and rescues them 42 months later. And boy, if there's ever a group of people that will need that promise, it's going to be that crowd. Because remember, Tom, Revelation 12, it's at that point that Satan loses permanent access to heaven, and he comes down and pursues the woman, or Israel, clothed with the sun and the moon and the 12 stars. And he actually is successful in eradicating 2/3 of the Jewish people during that time period. Zechariah 13, verses 8 and 9. And so they're going to need a word from the Lord, or a promise that in spite of this intense warfare, that generation will not pass away until Jesus comes back and rescues them. And it's basically a statement that the Jewish nation is not going to pass away in the second half of the tribulation period. And God can't allow them to pass away because he's got to fulfill his covenants through them, in the millennial kingdom. And I think that understanding of this generation fits well with what Jesus said about his generation. Remember at the end of Matthew 23, he said, all this, AD 70, will come upon this generation. He was talking about a specific generation of Jews in time. And when the identical expression is used in Matthew 24, he's talking about a specific identifiable Jews living at a point in time who are going to need a promise from God in spite of intense warfare. So linking this to 1948 and running a calculation is bankrupt. The terminus a quo, meaning beginning point, is off. And it was sort of the Hal Lindsey approach that got us all thinking this way. And as much as I love Hal Lindsey, I think what he introduced there was an error.
Yeah, that's an outstanding explanation. I think it's the best explanation I've ever heard on it. So when you look at the fig tree, because Jesus uses that illustration, he uses the fig tree. When you see the fig tree blossom, then you know that the summer is near. Hence, this generation will not pass away. Do you see, there's two schools of thought on this. One is the fig tree is specific to the nation of Israel, which takes people, I think, back to 1948. The other school of thought is, look, where Jesus is talking about the fig tree, he's talking about all the different signs, because he gave many different signs up to that point when he brings up the fig tree blossoming. Which category do you put the fig tree in? Do you say that fig tree is a reference to the nation of Israel? Or I totally get what you're saying about the second coming of Christ in relation to the destruction of the temple, the generation that sees that. In fact, again, I think that's outstanding explanation.
Yeah. Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I do see the fig tree as the blossoming of Israel, but there's more to it than that. With the blossoming of Israel in 1948 is going to come a particular generation of Jews that are going to see their temple desecrated. And I'm just getting this from the context because the definitive sign in Matthew 24 is the desecration of the temple. And he tells them, when this happens, you need to, flee, into the mountains. Let those living in Judea, flee to the mountains. And that's the folks that he says, you're not going to pass away, that generation. until all of these things are fulfilled. So when he's talking about the fig tree, he's dealing with that particular generation, and it's the generation which sees all these things, which includes the rebirth of Israel, but it also includes a bunch of other things, such as the famines, the rumors of war, all of the things spoken of early in Matthew 24. It includes the desecration of the temple. And so that's the generation that, in other words, in my opinion, that's the fig tree generation. They're Jews living on the earth that have just seen their temple desecrated. That's the generation that sees all these things. And so the fig tree and the promise that they won't pass away, despite Satan's wrath in the second 42 months, is all for them. So again, I know that's a boring interpretation because everybody wants to run a calculation from 1948. And that's why I keep saying, and this is a Latin expression, the terminus a quo is wrong. Terminus a quo is beginning point. The beginning point is not 1948. The beginning point is not 1967. The beginning point is the middle point of the tribulation when the temple is desecrated. That's when you start running your calculation.
Yeah, very good. That's fantastic. I just love it. Okay, I have another question, and I don't know if you address this in your book. We were talking about a book you have earlier. I know you're not a book salesman, but could you hold up the book real quick?
Sure.
So people can see it, because you have a lot in there that I think will answer a lot of people's questions too.
Well, it's called The Middle East Meltdown, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel. It was written in 2016, if you can see that.
I'm to your left just a little bit.
My left.
Right there. A little bit more to your, right there. Stop. There, that's it. Okay. Perfect. Right there. Yeah. The Middle East Meltdown, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel. So thank you, Andy. In that book, you have all kinds of things that will answer a lot of people's questions. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, if people want to know more about the two-phase view that we were talking about earlier of Ezekiel 38 and 39, they get a fuller explanation in that book. If people want to know why I don't think Psalm 83 is a war, they'll get more of an explanation in the book. But it's really a book designed to answer the journalistic questions about Ezekiel 38 and 39. You know, who is involved? When will the battle take place? Why is there this invasion? What is the outcome? And how is the world being set up right now for this end time invasion? And then it ends with 7 points of application. It has a clear statement of the gospel at the end. So this is something that you could, give to an unbeliever, because it's interesting, Tom, unbelievers, when you start explaining these things to them, you'll find that you get a millimeter of hearing from them that you don't normally get when you just do ordinary evangelism. People are interested in what's going on with the Middle East, and God has something to say about it. And then it ends with 7 points of application, and it's under 100 pages, and it's a book you could read, fairly fast.
Great. Very good. Thank you for that. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I got a question on the burning of the weapons for 7 years, Ezekiel chapter 39. Do you address that in your book?
Mm-hmm. I do. And, the big argument is, well, if the weapons burn for 7 years, we've got to put this battle before the tribulation period starts, because we can't have weapons burning in the millennium. And my response to that is, why can't we have weapons burning in the millennium? Revelation 19, verses 2 and 3 talks about Babylon burning all the way through the millennium, as I understand it. The millennium is not the eternal state. It's just a renovation. It's not a ex nihilo new creation. And there's going to be lots of things going on in the millennium, like animal sacrifices and death to a limited extent. And so I don't look at these weapons burning and saying, oh no, we can't have weapons burning in the millennium, therefore I need to yank this battle, to before the tribulation period. so that the weapons can burn in the tribulation period before the millennium starts. I don't see burning of weapons as any problem. And so I have no problem putting Ezekiel 39, towards the end of the tribulation.
When Egypt is desolate, there's a passage, I think it is in Ezekiel, no, it's in Isaiah. Egypt is desolate for a period of 40 years. That appears to be to me, it appears to be in the millennial kingdom.
Yeah, I need to study that one a little more, but I don't have a problem with that because Isaiah 65, verse 20, talks about death amongst the mortals that repopulated the earth, that were believers, not us in glorified bodies as the church, but mortals that will survive the tribulation period. Believers will enter the millennial kingdom in their mortal bodies, and they'll repopulate the earth, and some of them are going to die. And there's going to be animals that die because there's going to be sacrifices again in Ezekiel's temple. So burning of weapons in the millennium, that's not a big problem for me. Egypt being desolate for 40 years in the millennial kingdom, that's not a big problem for me. Now, if people said that's going to happen in the eternal state, then we have a problem because there's no death in the eternal state. But the millennium is very different than the eternal state. It's a renovation and not a ex nihilo new creation.
Yeah. I want to address this. Someone named Diane said, I got something wrong. I don't know what it is. She said, I got wrong. I'd like to know what it is she thinks I got wrong. So maybe, Diane, you can try your question one more time or just email me what the problem is you have with something I said. So I'm not sure what it is. Okay. With this Antichrist, I got a couple of different questions about him and his kingdom, so I'm going to put them together as best as I possibly can. Will he have dominion over the whole world?
The Antichrist?
Yes.
Yes, he eventually will have dominion over the whole world because Daniel 7, verse 23 says his 10 kingdom confederation will reign over the entire earth. And Revelation 13, 16 through 18, the famous mark of the beast system, says it ensnares, everybody. Then there's going to be some that won't take the mark of the beast, and many of them will be martyred. But these are global predictions. Okay,
so with that, there you still have nations that are resisting him. You see, like in Daniel chapter 11, I think it's Ammon, and see parts of Jordan. It appears Egypt resists him. So there is this. It doesn't mean everybody's going along with the plan. And I think that there's misunderstanding in that. There's individuals that resist him, but there also seems to be leaders in countries that are saying, we're not buying into this. And when I look at it, it appears Antichrist rises up out of a revived Roman Empire, I would say Western, the Western Roman Empire. I don't believe in Islamic Antichrist. And European at its core, and not... I look at China, they don't exactly strike me as ever being a country that would ever be willing to submit to a European leader. So you have this dominion, and I think we can see the formation of this now just with the rules and regulations and mandates and all the different things that are coming out of the globalists that are reaching to everywhere in the world. But the real power behind it's do you believe it's going to be rising out of Europe?
Well, I do, because he in Daniel 9:27, the nearest antecedent to that is Titus of Rome. So I think he's going to rise out of some kind of Eurocentric empire, but it's not going to be only Europe. Eventually, it's going to be the whole world. Daniel 7, verse 23 says that. And so it's a global empire. He reigns over the whole world. Now, it is true that not all the nations, as you say, are going to want to cooperate. Remember, 3 are going to resist. 7 will submit. So 3 have to be subdued of the 10 horns there in Daniel 7. You gave some other examples in Daniel 11 of nations not cooperating. But I think this is why the Antichrist empire is described as iron and clay, the feet of Daniel 2. iron and clay not mixing. In other words, if you go back to ancient Rome and kind of back up to Greece and then to Medo-Persia and back to Babylon, the statue, remember Daniel 2, the metals get more valuable as you go up. And so what I think is those earlier empires were more centralized. Whoever was running them had more control over everybody. But as you move through the statue, suddenly you get to these legs and they're divided. And then you get to the feet and iron and clay don't mix together. And I think that's talking about the gradual decentralization. And so the Antichrist, he's going to have a pseudo peace. It looks like he's in control of the world for a season, but it quickly deteriorates. And the nations in his global kingdom actually war with one another. And I think that's what is being described in Daniel 11, the book of Revelation, etc.
Great. Thank you. Another question. This will be the last one. I promised you'd be out by now a few minutes ago. So got time. I'm
having a great time.
All right. This is really good. I can't wait to have you back. Okay. Do you believe that this 10 beast system, 10 nations are going to be Europe only, or do you think it'll be the globe divided into 10 regions?
Well, I used to hold to the view taught by Hal Lindsey that it was strictly revived Rome. But Arnold Fruchtenbaum, switched my view on it, because when you look at Daniel chapter 7 and verse 23, if I could just read that to you. Mm-hmm. Daniel, of course, is talking about these 10 kingdoms. And it says, "Thus he said, the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth and tread it down." So you look at that and you say, well, that can't just be 10 nations within Europe. This is 10 regions dispersed throughout the world. Europe, arguably, being one of the 10, being a major player, but not the whole enchilada. And when you read Arnold Fruchtenbaum's book, Footsteps of the Messiah, he puts forth a really good argument that this is talking about not so much kings, but regions governed by different kings. And those regions are drawn up in such a way that they cover the entire world, the entire globe. As you know, Tom, the Club of Rome mm-hmm. divided up the world just like that not long ago. Not in 7 or 12, but in 10.
In 10.
And I think there's going to be a region in Europe. I think there's going to be another region, what's called the North American Union. That'll be kind of a merger between America, Canada, and Mexico, which, by the way, explains why they won't enforce the border anymore mm-hmm. between the United States and America. It does. And they're going to have one currency called the Amero, so that will be a region. Europe, they've already done it. They've got the euro, and the tiny European states have no power anymore. They're just debating societies. And Monet, who is the architect of the European Union, in his book, at the very end of the book, it's his, I can't remember if it's his autobiography, his memoirs. He says that what we've done in Europe is just beta testing for the rest of the world. So the region that we've created in Europe, we're going to create these everywhere. So Europe is a region, the North American Union is a region, and there's going to be eventually the world will be divided up into these 10 regions. And I don't think it's just a revived Roman Empire from Europe, the way Hal Lindsey taught it. I think it's global, and you see that in Daniel 7, verse 23. And to get more of an explanation on it, I'd recommend people read Arnold Fruchtenbaum's book, The Footsteps of the Messiah. He's the one that persuaded me.
Yeah, I agree. Same thing. I have, in the 1990s, I believed there was going to be 10 kings out of Europe for same reason. And I was taught through the Calvary chapels. That was typical Calvary Chapel way. And I started looking and I go, wait a minute, this is 10 regions globally. And then James Cadiz and I had an interesting debate about 6 months ago on it. He still holds to that view. He almost had me convinced about a month ago, and then I retracted that after about an hour. I thought, no, this is global. It's going to be 10 regions. I'm convinced of it. Andy, it's been great having you on here today. I can't wait to have you back. We do this every Monday afternoon. If you're free and your wife Ann will let you have an hour or so with us, that would love to have you back on here.
Absolutely. We could do that again. And this time flies when you're having fun.
It does. It does.
Well, I definitely have to. This is a joy to do this. So we'll do it again.
Thank you very much. Listen, everybody, I want to ask you to please like and share this video if you liked it. It helps us to be able to get the word out. And also make sure you go to hopeforourtimes.com and subscribe to the email. It's free to do that. You just put stay connected and you will be there. And what else do I got? I can't remember what else. Oh, I got a note on my phone I got to say. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Where can we find Andy? Dr. Andy Woods, is that correct on your beneath your name there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that's my website. But if I have a YouTube channel, just like you guys all have those, if you just type in my name into the YouTube search engine, my YouTube channel should come up, and we upload videos there probably about 4 times a week. You know, I'm a pastor in a local church, and so those videos, I teach 3 Bible studies per week, and then we do a kind of a pastor's point of view, like you guys do, prophecy updates, and we do that every Friday, and those get uploaded there as well. And obviously, it's all free. Just like and subscribe. So that's an easy way to keep track of me.
They're fantastic. I've watched many of them that have been on there. Like I said, I can't wait to have you back on here. And also want to thank everybody for your super chats. It's your donations that help us to keep doing what we do. And I will be in Florida with Jeff Kinley at the end of this month, just a few weeks away. I hope that you can join us. And God bless you, everybody. Until next time.